I found myself standing in front of the elegant Victorian house I'd called home for 37 years, now with a sold sign hammered into the front lawn. 3 months ago, I had the keys to this house, a garden full of heirloom roses and the respect of my family and community. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now I had nothing but a suitcase full of hastily packed clothes, a senior citizen's bus pass, and the crushing realization that my own daughter-in-law had convinced everyone, including my son, that I was losing my mind. The late autumn wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. I pulled my worn cardigan tighter, watching as the new owners, a young couple with matching SUVs, carried boxes through what used to be my front door. They looked happy, excited to start their life in my home, blissfully unaware that the previous owner was standing across the street, fighting back tears. "Mrs. Jenkins?" A voice startled me from my thoughts. Marcus, my neighbor of 20 years, approached with concern etched on his weathered face. "Ellie, what are you doing here? Michael told everyone you moved to that fancy assisted living place. Said you were happy there." I couldn't meet his eyes. How could I explain that my son and his wife had orchestrated an elaborate lie? That Becky had whispered to friends and family that poor Ellie was slipping away, forgetting things, becoming a danger to herself? That I'd been manipulated into signing a power of attorney document during what I thought was a routine visit to update my will? That by the time I realized what was happening, my house had been sold, my possessions divided up, and my life savings managed into near oblivion? "I'm just saying goodbye," I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "And no, Marcus, I'm not in assisted living. I'm at Pine Terrace Apartments. It's temporary until I figure things out." It started 6 months ago with a missed coffee pot. Such a small thing, leaving the coffee maker on before heading to my weekly library volunteer shift. I'd done it maybe twice in my life. But when I returned home that evening, Michael and Becky were waiting in my kitchen, faces grave as funeral directors. "Mom, you left the coffee pot on all day," Michael said, his voice gentle but concerned. "You could have burned the house down." "Oh, goodness," I'd said, embarrassed but not particularly alarmed. "Thank you for turning it off. I was running late this morning." But Becky exchanged a look with my son. That look, the kind adults give each other over the heads of children. "Ellie," she said, using that slow, over-enunciated speech pattern she'd adopt over the coming months. "This is the 3rd time this month. Don't you remember? We talked about this last Tuesday." It wasn't true. I would have remembered such a conversation. I prided myself on my sharp mind. 30 years teaching. 3rd graders had honed my memory and attention to detail. But before I could protest, Michael chimed in. "And last month you forgot Tyler's birthday dinner. We were all waiting at the restaurant." That shook me. Had I forgotten my grandson's birthday? But no, Tyler's birthday was April 12th. We'd celebrated the previous weekend with a family barbecue in my backyard. The dinner Michael referenced was an impromptu celebration at a new restaurant Becky wanted to try. They'd called that morning, and I'd already committed to helping with a fundraiser at the library. "That wasn't his birthday dinner?" I corrected. Gently. "His birthday was the weekend before. We had the barbecue here, remember? You brought that fancy grill." Another look passed between them. "Mom," Michael said softly, "the barbecue was last year. This year we had reservations at the Copper Kitchen. You said you'd be there." I felt the first flutter of unease. Had I confused the years? At 67, I sometimes had to think twice about dates, but mixing up entire years? That didn't sound like me. Still, the certainty in my son's voice planted a seed of doubt. "I'm sorry if I misunderstood," I conceded. "I've been a bit busy with the library fundraiser." Becky placed her hand on mine, her French manicured nails gleaming under my kitchen lights. "We're worried about you, Ellie. Living alone in this big house since Will passed away. It's a lot to manage. I withdrew my hand. I'm managing just fine, thank you. The house is paid off, and I have my pension and Will's life insurance. Of course you do, she soothed, that patronizing tone creeping in again. But wouldn't it be nice to have something smaller? Less to worry about? That was the first time. She suggested selling my home, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next few weeks, small incidents began multiplying. A misplaced set of reading glasses became evidence of my confusion. A forgotten dentist appointment, that I later discovered, had been rescheduled without my knowledge, was concerning memory loss. The time I didn't answer my phone for 3 hours, because I was at the movies with my friend Harriet, triggered a police wellness check orchestrated by a worried Becky. Each incident was meticulously documented and shared with my doctor, my friends, my bridge club, and my neighbors. Always with that same concerned expression, always with Mom's best interests as the stated motivation. I began doubting myself. Was I forgetting things? Was my mind slipping away like my mother's had in her final years? The thought terrified me. I'd watched my brilliant, vibrant mother deteriorate from Alzheimer's, eventually not recognizing her own children. Could it be happening to me, so soon, so suddenly? My world began to shrink. Michael suggested I stop volunteering. It's too much pressure, Mom, and driving, just until we get some tests done. Becky helpfully arranged for grocery delivery and began stopping by daily to check on things. Friends started treating me differently. Invitations dwindled. My neighbor Gladys, who I'd had coffee with every Thursday for 15 years, began speaking to me in that same slow, loud voice Becky used. "Do you need anything today, Ellie?" she'd call across the fence, as if volume could penetrate cognitive decline. By the time Becky suggested I meet with my estate lawyer to update a few things while you're still having good days, I was a shadow of my former self. Doubt had crept into every corner of my mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe I couldn't trust my own memories anymore. The lawyer, Mr. Graves, had handled Will's estate after his heart attack 3 years earlier. He seemed surprised by our visit but greeted me warmly enough. Becky had driven me there and insisted on sitting in on the meeting, just to help Ellie remember all the details. "Mrs. Jenkins wants to update her will and discuss a few other matters," Becky explained, speaking for me as had become her habit. Mr. Graves looked to me. "What did you have in mind, Eleanor?" Before I could answer, Becky jumped in. "We're concerned about Ellie's ability to manage her affairs long-term. The doctor is quite worried about her cognitive decline." I frowned. "Dr. Morris said that? When did you speak with him?" "Remember, Ellie, we discussed this after your last appointment. The forgetting, the confusion. He thinks it might be early-stage dementia." I had no memory of such a conversation, which only increased my anxiety. Was this another thing I'd forgotten? Mr. Graves looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps Mrs. Jenkins would like to discuss these matters privately?" "Oh, there's no need for secrets in this family," Becky laughed, placing her hand on mine in what appeared to be a gesture of support. "We're all working together to make sure Ellie is taken care of." The meeting proceeded, and I found myself nodding along as Becky outlined what we wanted to do. Update my will to ensure Michael and the grandchildren were provided for, create a healthcare directive, and establish a power of attorney, just in case things get worse. Mr. Graves placed several documents in front of me explaining each one. I was listening, trying to focus, but my mind kept returning to this supposed diagnosis I couldn't remember receiving. When had Dr. Morris said these things? Why couldn't I recall such an important conversation? "This grants power of attorney to Michael," Mr. Graves explained, pointing to a document covered in legal terminology. "It would only take effect if you were declared incompetent by a physician, which hopefully won't happen for a long time," Becky added quickly. "But better safe than sorry, right?" I hesitated. pen hovering over the signature line. Something felt wrong, rushed. But what if I really was declining? What if my resistance was just confusion or paranoia? Wouldn't it be better to have these safeguards in place? "It's for the best, Mom," Michael had said that morning. "We just want to make sure you're protected." My son, my only child, who had never given me reason to doubt his love or intentions. I signed the papers. It was the last decision I would make about my own life for the next 3 months. Within weeks, everything accelerated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't if I needed care, but how soon I could be moved. Becky, a real estate agent by profession, brought prospective buyers through my house while I was at doctor's appointments that often turned out to be coffee with Becky's mother or lunch with a friend of hers who worked in senior living placement. When I objected, increasingly frustrated by the confusion and constantly shifting plans, my protests were met with gentle corrections. "We discussed this yesterday, Ellie, don't you remember?" Or worse, concerned glances and whispered conversations when they thought I couldn't hear. "It's progressing faster than we expected," Becky murmured to Michael in my own kitchen, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "The doctor said this can happen. Lucid one moment, completely lost the next." "What doctor?" I hadn't seen Dr. Morris in months, and he certainly hadn't said anything about dementia when I last saw him for my annual physical. The final blow came on a crisp September morning when Becky arrived with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. She seemed particularly cheerful, almost giddy with excitement. "We found the perfect place for you," she announced, spreading brochures across my kitchen table. "Lakeview Senior Living. It has a memory care unit with the best reputation in the state. We can move you in next week." "Move me in?" I stared at the glossy photos of smiling seniors playing bingo and eating in a communal dining room. "I'm not moving to a memory care facility. I'm staying in my home." Becky's smile faltered, then reassembled itself more firmly. "Ellie, we've been over this. The house is sold. The closing is on Friday." "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. I never agreed to sell my house." "Of course you did, Mom," Michael said, entering from the living room where he'd apparently been waiting. "We discussed it last month. You signed the listing agreement, remember? The Andersons' offer was exactly what we hoped for." "I never signed," I began, but the certainty in their faces made me falter. Had I signed something without understanding what it was? Had they explained it and I'd forgotten? The familiar terror of not trusting my own mind washed over me. "Look," Becky said soothingly, pulling out her phone. "I have a picture from that day. You were so relieved to have it handled." She showed me a photo of myself at my dining room table, pen in hand, smiling up at the camera. A document lay before me, but the angle made it impossible to see what it was. "That could be anything," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I don't remember agreeing to sell my home." "That's why we're getting you help, Mom," Michael said. His eyes filled with what looked like genuine concern. "These memory lapses are getting worse. The house is too much for you now. Lakeview will be safe, comfortable. You'll have people checking on you around the clock." I looked from my son to his wife, trying to make sense of what was happening. Either they were lying, conspiring to sell my home without my consent, or I was indeed losing my grip on reality. Given the past months of confusion and forgotten moments, the latter seemed increasingly possible. "I need to lie down," I said finally, overwhelmed by the conflicting versions of reality. "Good idea," Becky said brightly. "You rest, and I'll start packing some of your things. The movers are coming Thursday for the furniture you're keeping. The rest goes to auction on Saturday." I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling. "Think, Ellie, think." I tried to recall signing a listing agreement or discussing selling the house, but there was nothing. Instead, a different memory surfaced. Becky asking me to sign a birthday card for Michael while I was distracted watching the news. Had there been other papers beneath the card? Another memory. Becky insisting I take a new medication, prescribed by Dr. Morris, that left me groggy and disoriented for days. When I'd questioned it later, she'd shown me a prescription bottle with my name on it. Had that been real? The doubts multiplied, feeding on each other. If I couldn't trust my memory, how could I be sure of anything? But if my memory was accurate, then my own family was gaslighting me, manipulating me into believing I was mentally incompetent. The thought seemed paranoid, absurd. My son loved me. We'd always been close, especially after his father died. Why would he do this? But as I glanced around my bedroom, already partially packed, with labeled boxes stacked in corners, a cold clarity began to seep through the fog of doubt. This house, my home, was worth over $800,000 in the current market. My savings and wills, life insurance added another substantial sum. If I was declared incompetent, with Michael holding power of attorney, I needed help, but who would believe me over my concerned son and his wife? Who would take the word of a supposedly confused old woman over the documented concerns of her family? I had 5 days until the closing. 5 days to figure out if I was losing my mind or being systematically manipulated out of everything I owned. That evening, I pretended to take the medication Becky left, hiding the pill under my tongue and disposing of it later. My head felt clearer the next morning than it had in weeks. I waited until Michael and Becky left. They'd been taking shifts staying with me, for my safety, before making my move. First, I called Dr. Morris's office, only to be told by his receptionist that he was on sabbatical and had been for 3 months. His replacement, Dr. Lawson, had no record of seeing me recently, despite Becky's claims of ongoing consultations. "Would you like to schedule an appointment?" the receptionist asked. "As soon as possible," I replied. She offered me a slot the following day at 10 a.m. I accepted, though I had no idea how I would get there without alerting Michael or Becky, who had taken my car keys for safety reasons. Next, I called my sister Harriet, who lived 2 hours away in Boston. We hadn't spoken in nearly a month. Another red flag I hadn't recognized. We normally talked weekly. "Ellie." Her voice was full of relief. "I've been trying to reach you. For weeks. Michael said you weren't feeling up to calls, but I was getting worried." "Harriet," I said, keeping my voice low though I was alone in the house, "I need your help. Something's very wrong." I explained everything, the sudden concerns about my memory, the convenient diagnosis no doctor had actually given me, the house being sold without my knowledge, and my growing suspicion that the medication I'd been taking was sedating me deliberately. That's elder abuse, Ellie," Harriet said, horror evident in her voice. "And fraud. We need to call the police." "And tell them what? That I think my son and his wife are gaslighting me into thinking I have dementia so they can sell my house? Who would believe that?" "I believe it," Harriet said firmly. "And I'm coming to get you. Today. Pack what you can carry. I'll be there. By dinner time." For the first time in months, I felt hope flickering to life. Someone believed me. I wasn't alone. "There's more," I said, the words tumbling out now. "I signed a power of attorney. They could use it to take me to court, to have me declared incompetent." "Then we need proof you're competent," Harriet said decisively. "Can you get to a doctor? One they don't know about?" "I have an appointment tomorrow with Dr. Lawson. She's covering for Dr. Morris." "Good. Get a cognitive assessment, on paper. And Ellie, don't let Michael or Becky know what you're doing. If they're really manipulating you this way—" "They are," I said, the certainty solidifying as I spoke. "I'm sure of it now. The medication, the lies about doctors' appointments, the convenient forgetting of conversations we never had. Then be careful. I'll text when I'm close." If anything changes, call me immediately. After hanging up, I moved quickly, gathering essential documents from my home office, birth certificate, social security card, insurance policies, and packing a small suitcase with clothes and toiletries. I found my spare car key, hidden in a jewelry box where I'd kept it since Will died, and tucked it into my pocket. Then I waited, watching the clock, planning my escape from my own home. Becky returned at 3, bringing groceries and more of the little yellow pills. "These are helping so much with your anxiety, Ellie," she said, filling a glass of water and holding it out expectantly. I pretended to take the pill, using a technique I'd perfected over the past 24 hours. "Thank you," I said, trying to sound grateful, docile. "I do feel calmer with them." She smiled, satisfied. "Michael will be here around 6. We're having pot roast for dinner, your favorite." It was actually Will's favorite, not mine. I preferred fish, but I nodded agreeably. "Sounds lovely. I think I'll rest before dinner." "Good idea." Becky's phone chimed, and she checked it, frowning slightly. "I need to make a quick call. Real estate business. You go lie down." I retreated to my bedroom but left the door cracked open, listening as Becky's voice drifted up from the kitchen. "We're still on for Friday's closing." "Yes, absolutely." "No, she's accepted it now. The doctor at Lakeview already has the room reserved." "Of course the power of attorney is valid. We had it notarized. Look, by next week this will all be settled. She'll be at Lakeview, the house will be sold, and we can finally access those accounts." Each word was another brick in the wall of evidence. They were planning to institutionalize me, sell my home, and gain control of my finances, all based on a dementia diagnosis that didn't exist. My phone vibrated softly beside me on the bed. A text from Harriet. 20 minutes away. "Ready?" I texted back. "Ready. Park down the street. We'll meet you." Now came the difficult part. I needed to leave without alerting Becky. I gathered my suitcase and purse, took a deep breath, and opened my bedroom window. The oak tree that had sheltered my home for decades offered a potential escape route. Its sturdy branch extended near enough to my window that Will had always worried Tyler would use it to sneak out as a teenager. I never imagined I'd be the one sneaking out at 67. Lowering my suitcase carefully to the branch, I secured it with the belt from my bathrobe, then climbed out after it, moving slowly but deliberately. My knees protested and my heart pounded, but determination drove me forward. I managed to reach the trunk, shimmy down to a height where dropping seemed reasonable, and let myself fall the last few feet to the soft grass below. The impact jarred, my bones, but nothing broke. I retrieved my suitcase, glanced around to ensure no neighbors were watching, and made my way along the hedge line to the street behind my house. 15 minutes later, I was in Harriet's car, trembling with adrenaline and relief. "My God, Ellie," she said, staring at me with wide eyes. "You climbed down a tree?" "Desperate times," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's go before they realize I'm gone." As Harriet pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the neighborhood I'd called home for nearly 4 decades. I didn't know when, or if, I would return. But for the first time in months, I was making my own choices again. Whatever happened next, I was reclaiming my life, one frightening step at a time. Harriet's downtown Boston apartment felt both alien and sanctuary-like after my harrowing escape. I sat on her pristine cream sofa, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, trying to process the seismic shift in my reality. My own son had conspired to have me declared incompetent. My daughter-in-law had systematically isolated me from friends and support networks. And tomorrow, strangers would finalize the purchase of my beloved home, all without my genuine consent. "You should eat something," Harriet said, setting a plate of toast and scrambled eggs before me. At 72, my sister remained formidable, silver, Haircut in a stylish bob, posture military straight from her years as a hospital administrator. "You're too thin, Ellie. How long have they been drugging you?" I shook my head, unsure. Weeks? Months? The pills started after I questioned the changes to my prescription. Becky said Dr. Morris had adjusted my blood pressure medication, but it made me so foggy. I poked at the eggs, my appetite non-existent, despite having barely eaten all day. "I feel like such a fool, Harriet. How did I not see what was happening?" Harriet settled beside me, her hand firm on my shoulder. "Because they're your family. You trusted them. Any reasonable person would. I gave them the perfect opening when I left the coffee pot on." The memory of that day, the true beginning of my ordeal, sent a fresh wave of shame through me. Such a simple mistake, and they leveraged it into this. "Stop that right now." Harriet's voice took on the commanding tone that had terrorized hospital residents for 30 years. "You're a victim of abuse, Ellie. Sophisticated, calculated abuse. No one blames someone for being manipulated by experts. Experts." The word struck me. Becky wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was a successful real estate agent who specialized in estate sales. Michael managed investment portfolios for a living. Together, they possessed the exact skills needed to orchestrate this scheme: property sales and financial management. "I have the appointment with Dr. Lawson tomorrow," I said, trying to focus on immediate concerns rather than the painful betrayal. "If I can get documentation proving I'm mentally competent, maybe we can stop the house sale." Harriet's expression remained grave. "I called my attorney friend Grace while you were in the shower. She's coming over first thing tomorrow to discuss options." "But Ellie," she hesitated, clearly weighing her words, "we need to be realistic about what we're facing. If Michael has power of attorney and the house closing is tomorrow, we're racing against the clock." A thought struck me. The power of attorney. It only activates if I'm declared incompetent by a physician, right? That's what the lawyer said. That's standard language, yes. But no doctor has actually diagnosed me with anything. Becky and Michael have been lying about consultations with Dr. Morris, who's been on sabbatical this whole time. Harriet's eyes widened slightly. "So legally the power of attorney shouldn't be valid yet." "Exactly." For the first time, I felt a spark of hope. "They've been acting as though it's already in effect, making decisions about my property and finances, but without a legitimate medical diagnosis?" "They're committing fraud," Harriet finished, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling Grace now. This changes things." While Harriet spoke with her attorney friend, I forced myself to eat a few bites of eggs, feeling strength gradually returning, not just physical strength from the nourishment, but mental clarity after months of induced fog. The more distance I put between myself and those mysterious yellow pills, the sharper my thoughts became. My phone buzzed with incoming messages, 14 texts and 8 missed calls, all from Michael and Becky. I showed the screen to Harriet after she ended. Her call. "They've noticed you're gone," she observed. Should I answer? Tell them I'm safe? Despite everything, he was still my son. I'd held him as a newborn, bandaged his skinned knees, celebrated his graduations and marriage. The thought of him frantic, with worry, regardless of his betrayal, tugged at me. Harriet's expression softened. "That's your choice, Ellie. But remember, they were planning to institutionalize you tomorrow. Against your will, based on a lie." I stared at the phone as another message appeared. "Mom, please call us. We're worried sick. The police are here. Please just let us know you're safe." The police? They'd reported me missing already, positioning themselves as the concerned family of a confused elderly woman. I need to respond, I decided, but carefully. If they know I'm with you, they might try to force me to return. I typed a brief message. "I am safe. I needed some time alone to think. Please cancel the house closing. We need to discuss this further when I return." deliberately vague, giving no indication of my whereabouts or plans. The response came immediately. "Mom, where are you? You can't be alone right now. You're not well. Please tell us where you are, so we can help you." I showed the message to Harriet, who snorted derisively. Translation: "Tell us where you are so we can drag you to Lakeview before you ruin our plans." Another message arrived, this one from Becky. "Ellie, we're so worried. The doctor says this confusion and paranoia is part of your condition. Please, come home. We only want what's best for you." "They're doubling down," I murmured, a chill running through me despite the apartment's warmth. "They think I'm having some sort of episode." "Or they want the police to think that," Harriet pointed out. "They're creating a paper trail, Ellie. Every message saying you're confused or paranoid builds their case." I set the phone aside, suddenly exhausted. The day's events, the escape, the drive to Boston, the emotional whiplash of acceptance and disbelief had drained what little energy I had. "Get some sleep," Harriet advised, clearing away my half-eaten dinner. "Grace will be here at 7:30 tomorrow. We need you sharp for that conversation and your doctor's appointment." The guest room was small but comfortable, with crisp blue sheets and a window overlooking the Charles River. I lay awake for hours, replaying moments from the past months, reinterpreting them through my new understanding. The accidents Becky always seemed to witness and document. The friends who gradually stopped calling after conversations with my concerned family. The convenient forgetting of conversations we'd supposedly had about my deteriorating condition. How long had they been planning this? Had it started even before the coffee pot incident? Or was that truly the spark that ignited their scheme? And worst of all, why? Financial gain seemed the obvious motive, but my son had a successful career. We'd always been close. How could he participate in something so cruel? Sleep finally claimed me around 3 a.m, bringing dreams of falling, of grasping for railings that dissolved in my hands, of calling for help but producing no sound. I woke to gentle knocking and the smell of coffee. Harriet entered, already dressed in a tailored pantsuit, carrying a steaming mug. "Grace will be here in 20 minutes, she said, setting the coffee on the nightstand. "I've laid out some of my clothes for you. We're close enough in size. There's a new toothbrush in the bathroom." The mundane practicalities anchored me. Brush teeth, change clothes, drink coffee. One step at a time through this nightmare. Grace. Sullivan arrived precisely on time, a compact woman in her late 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened without interruption as I recounted the past months, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "To be clear," she said when I finished, "you have never been diagnosed with dementia or any cognitive impairment by a medical professional?" "Never. Dr. Morris was my physician for years, but I haven't seen him since before all this started. He's apparently been on sabbatical. And the power of attorney document? It specifically states it only takes effect upon medical certification of incapacity." "Yes, I remember that part clearly." Grace nodded, setting down her notebook. "Then we have grounds to challenge both. The power of attorney and any actions taken under its authority, including the house sale. But we need to move quickly." She outlined a plan. "First, get a comprehensive cognitive assessment from Dr. Lawson. Second, file emergency injunctions to halt both the house sale and any financial transactions Michael might be orchestrating. Third, document everything: the medication I'd been given without legitimate prescription, the false claims about doctor's visits, the isolation from friends and family." "This isn't just civil fraud," Grace explained. "What you're describing constitutes elder abuse, which is criminal. But building that case takes time, and right now our priority is protecting your assets and autonomy." "Can we really stop the house closing today?" I asked, hope mingling with doubt. "I've already started the paperwork for an emergency injunction. Once we have Dr. Lawson's assessment, we'll file immediately. The documentation of your competence creates significant legal questions about the validity of the sale. The plan gave me something concrete to focus on, a path forward through the disorientation of betrayal. By 9:30, we were in a cab, heading to Dr. Lawson's office, Grace accompanying us for what she called medical advocacy. Dr. Patricia Lawson was younger than I expected, with a direct gaze and a calm demeanor that instantly put me at ease. She listened to an abbreviated version of recent events, her expression remaining neutral, save for a slight tightening around her eyes. "I'd like to perform a full cognitive assessment," she said. "It will take about an hour. Are you comfortable with that, Mrs. Jenkins?" "Absolutely," I replied. "And please call me Ellie." The assessment was comprehensive. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, attention spans, language skills. Some parts were surprisingly challenging, requiring concentration. I hadn't exercised in months, but I felt a quiet confidence as I worked through each section. When we finished, Dr. Lawson reviewed her notes, then looked up with a small smile. "Ellie, your cognitive function is well within normal parameters for someone your age. In fact, your verbal reasoning scores are exceptional, likely a benefit from your years as an educator." Relief washed over me. "So there's no sign of dementia?" "None whatsoever. There are normal age-related changes in some processing speeds, but nothing approaching impairment. I'd be interested in doing a follow-up assessment once you've been fully clear of any sedating medications for a few weeks, as I suspect your scores would be even higher." At my request, she documented her findings in a formal letter, stating explicitly that I demonstrated no signs of cognitive impairment and was fully capable of managing my own affairs. She also ordered toxicology screening to identify the medication I'd been given, taking samples of the pills I'd brought with me. "These don't appear to be blood pressure medication," she noted, examining one of the small yellow tablets. "My suspicion, based on the symptoms you described, is that these contain a benzodiazepine, a sedative that could certainly cause confusion, memory issues, and lethargy, especially if given in inappropriate doses." Armed with Dr. Lawson's assessment, we returned to Grace's office to file the emergency injunctions. The hours blurred as documents were prepared, signed, and submitted to the court. Grace's paralegal brought us sandwiches that I barely tasted, my mind fixed on the clock, counting down to the 2 o'clock closing time for my house. At 1:30, Grace received a call from the judge reviewing our injunction request. She stepped out to take it, returning 5 minutes later with the first good news in months. "The judge has granted the temporary injunction on the house sale," she announced. "He's ordered all proceedings halted pending a full hearing next week. The title company and real estate office have been notified." I sagged in my chair, relief momentarily overwhelming me. "Thank you," I whispered, unsure if I was addressing Grace, Harriet, or some higher power that had finally interceded on my behalf. "This is just the first step," Grace cautioned. "Michael and Becky will fight this. They've invested too much in their scheme to back down easily." As if summoned by her warning, my phone rang, Michael's name flashing on the screen. After a questioning glance at Grace, who nodded encouragingly, I answered on speaker. "What have you done?" His voice contained none of the faux concern from yesterday's messages, only cold fury. "Do you have any idea what you've just cost this family? The Andersons are threatening to sue for breach of contract." "Hello, Michael," I replied, forcing calm into my voice despite my racing heart. "I've stopped the illegal sale of my home, which I never consented to sell." "You absolutely did consent. You signed the listing agreement. You approved the offer." "Mom, this delusion isn't helping anyone, least of all yourself." "I never signed a listing agreement, Michael, and I've just completed a comprehensive cognitive assessment with Dr. Lawson. I have no cognitive impairment whatsoever." A beat of silence followed then. "Who is Dr. Lawson?" "Mom, you're confused again. Dr. Morris has been treating you." "Dr. Morris has been on sabbatical for 3 months," I interrupted. I confirmed this with his office. He hasn't seen me or prescribed any medication during that time. Another silence, longer this time. When Michael spoke again, his voice had modulated, reverting to the gentle, concerned tone he'd perfected over recent months. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're clearly not well. Where are you? Let me come get you, and we can sort this out. Mrs. Jenkins is with legal counsel, Grace interjected smoothly. This is Grace Sullivan, attorney at law. I'm representing Eleanor Jenkins in this matter. All future communication should be directed to my office. Who the hell? Michael began, but Grace continued, her voice calm but authoritative. We have documented evidence of potential elder abuse, including medical documentation of Mrs. Jenkins's cognitive competence and preliminary toxicology results suggesting she was being administered sedatives without her knowledge or consent. I strongly advise you to retain counsel immediately. The line went dead. Michael had hung up. That went about as expected, Grace observed, making another note in her book. Be prepared. This is likely to get uglier before it gets better. She was right. Over the next 24 hours, Michael and Becky launched a counteroffensive. They filed an emergency petition for guardianship, claiming I was experiencing a psychiatric crisis and had fled necessary medical care. They submitted sworn statements from friends and neighbors, people I'd known for years, testifying to concerning behaviors they'd witnessed. They even produced a letter from Dr. Morris attesting to my cognitive decline. Grace met each maneuver with calm efficiency. She filed the documentation from Dr. Lawson, arranged for independent verification of Dr. Morris's sabbatical status, and prepared subpoenas for my financial records to track any suspicious activity. Most crucially, she filed a police report, documenting the suspected elder abuse, triggering an automatic investigation by Adult Protective Services. The criminal investigation will move slowly, she warned me during a strategy session 3 days after my escape. But it creates additional pressure and scrutiny on Michael and Becky. They've built their entire scheme on an alleged medical condition that doesn't exist. That house of cards will collapse under proper investigation. I nodded, trying to maintain the hope her confidence inspired. But beneath the legal maneuvers and strategic planning, a mother's heart was breaking. Every document filed, every allegation countered, deepened the chasm between me and my only child. Even if we prevailed legally, stopping the house sale, reclaiming my assets, proving the fraud, what then? How does one rebuild from such fundamental betrayal? Harriet found me that evening, staring out her living room window at the river below, tears streaming silently down my face. What are you thinking about? She asked softly, settling beside me. The summer Michael was 8, I replied. The memory, surfacing unbidden. He broke his arm falling from the treehouse Will built. Do you remember? He was so brave at the hospital, didn't cry once during the setting. But that night, after we got home, he crawled into our bed and sobbed. Not from pain, but because he was scared the cast would never come off, that he'd be broken forever. Harriet took my hand, saying nothing. I held him all night, promising him that bones heal, that he would be whole again. I believed it completely then, that a mother's love could fix anything, heal any wound. I wiped at my tears with my free hand. How do I reconcile that little boy with the man who orchestrated all this? Where did I go wrong, Harriet? You didn't, she said firmly. Michael made his choices as an adult. Maybe Becky influenced him, maybe greed did, but ultimately, he chose this path. That's not on you, Ellie. But if he goes to jail? My voice broke on the word. That's a long way off if it happens at all. Right now, focus on protecting yourself. One step at a time. One step at a time. It became my mantra through the grueling week that followed. The court hearing on the house sale injunction was set for the following Wednesday. In preparation, Grace deposed the real estate agent who had listed my home, the notary who had witnessed the power of attorney, and several neighbors who had provided statements about my concerning behavior. The picture that emerged confirmed our suspicions. Becky had handled every aspect of the house sale personally, using her position at the real estate agency to fast-track the listing and acceptance of the Andersons' offer. The notary admitted he hadn't actually witnessed me sign the power of attorney. Becky had brought in the document already signed, claiming I was having a bad day and couldn't come in person. And the neighbors, when pressed, acknowledged that most of the concerning behaviors they'd reported were actually told to them by Becky or Michael, not witnessed firsthand. They created a perfect echo chamber, Grace explained as we reviewed the deposition transcripts. They told people you were declining, then those people repeated it back to them and to others until it became accepted truth within your community. Classic gaslighting, but on a community scale. The toxicology results on the yellow pills confirmed Dr. Lawson's suspicion. They contained a significant dose of a sedative typically prescribed for severe anxiety or insomnia, not blood pressure issues. Without my medical records showing such a prescription, the implication was clear. I had been drugged deliberately to create symptoms resembling cognitive impairment. As damning as the evidence was, I still struggled with the why. The financial motive seemed obvious on the surface. My house, investments, and insurance totaled over $1 million. But Michael earned a good living. Becky's real estate business was thriving. Why risk everything? Careers, reputation, freedom, for money they didn't desperately need. The answer came unexpectedly, from Tyler, my 16-year-old grandson. He called me on the 6th day of my stay with Harriet, his number flashing on my phone just after dinner. "Grandma?" His voice was hesitant, uncertain in a way that reminded me painfully of the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when meeting strangers. "Are you really okay? Dad and Mom said you were having problems." "I'm fine, Tyler," I assured him, heart aching at the worry in his voice. "Completely fine. There's been a misunderstanding." "That's what I thought." Relief colored his words. "Because you seemed totally normal at my birthday. But then Dad said, you were confused, forgetting things." We talked for nearly an hour. Tyler, with a teenager's keen sense of justice and betrayal, shared observations from the past months, hushed conversations between his parents that stopped when he entered a room, his mother's sudden interest in properties in the Maldives, his father's cryptic comment about securing their future. Most tellingly, he revealed that Becky had been laid off from her real estate position 3 months earlier, right around when their concerns about my cognitive health began. She'd been hiding it, pretending to go to work while actually spending days looking at luxury properties online and arguing with Michael about money. "They're always fighting about the beach house Mom wants," Tyler said. "Dad says they can't afford it, and Mom says they could if he'd just handle things with you." I didn't know what that meant until all this. The missing piece clicked into place. Financial pressure, Becky's job loss, coupled with expensive aspirations, the temptation of my assets, accessible if only I were declared incompetent. "Tyler, I need you to do something for me," I said carefully. "Look around your house. See if you can find any documents about me. Medical papers, legal papers, anything. But don't let your parents know you're looking." "Already did," he replied, surprising me with his initiative. "There's a folder in Dad's home office. I took pictures of some of it before he caught me and freaked out. Can you send those to me?" "That's why I called," he said, a hint of his usual confidence returning. "Check your email." The photos arrived moments later, slightly blurry images of documents labeled Jenkins Estate Planning. Among them was a complete financial accounting of my assets, lists of items from my home categorized by value, and most, disturbingly, a care budget for Lakeview that allocated the bare minimum to my maintenance while establishing a management fee to Michael that would consume nearly 70% of my monthly income. They had planned it all, calculated it down to the dollar. My son and his wife had assessed my worth, determined I was more valuable to them incapacitated than loved, and proceeded accordingly. I forwarded the photos to Grace, hands shaking so badly I could barely operate the phone. "Grandma?" Tyler's voice pulled me back from the edge of despair. "I'm really sorry about what they're doing. It's so messed up." I tried to tell Dad it was wrong, but he said I didn't understand, that sometimes you have to make hard choices for people who can't make them for themselves. "It's not your fault," I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady for his sake. "None of this is your responsibility." "But I want to help," he insisted. "I can testify or whatever. Tell the truth about what I've seen." The offer nearly broke me. This child willing to stand against his parents for the sake of justice. The cost to him would be enormous. "Let's see if it comes to that," I said gently. "For now, just knowing you believe me helps more than you can imagine." After we hung up, I sat motionless, trying to absorb this final confirmation of the cold calculation behind my family's betrayal. It wasn't a spontaneous scheme born of opportunity. It wasn't even primarily Michael's idea, based on Tyler's account. It was a deliberate plan, likely initiated by Becky in response to financial strain, with my son as a necessary accomplice. The next morning, I shared Tyler's revelations with Grace and Harriet. "This actually strengthens our case considerably," Grace said, reviewing the photos Tyler had sent. "It establishes clear premeditation and financial motive. If Tyler is willing to provide a statement about Becky's job loss and their financial difficulties—" "I won't ask that of him," I interrupted, firmly. "He's 16. This is already tearing him apart." Grace nodded, understanding. "There are other ways to document the employment issue. The real estate agency will have records of her termination." We were discussing next steps when my phone rang, an unknown local number. I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Jenkins? This is Detective Garcia from the Mapleton Police Department, Elder Crimes Division. We're investigating the report filed by your attorney regarding potential financial exploitation and elder abuse. I'd like to ask you some questions if you're available." The criminal investigation was moving faster than Grace had anticipated. I looked to her for guidance and she nodded encouragingly. "I'm available," I replied, putting the call on speaker. "My attorney is with me as well." Detective Garcia had a methodical approach, leading me through the timeline of events chronologically, asking clarifying questions but never challenging my account. When I mentioned the medication, he requested that I preserve any remaining pills as evidence. "We've already begun investigating the financial aspects," he explained toward the end of our conversation. "Preliminary findings show several concerning transactions from your accounts beginning approximately 3 months ago. Small withdrawals at first, growing larger over time." "I never authorized any withdrawals," I said, a fresh wave of violation washing over me. "We're aware. We've also confirmed with Dr. Morris's office that he has indeed been on sabbatical and has not seen you professionally during the time frame your son and daughter-in-law claim. Mrs. Jenkins, based on our investigation thus far, I believe you have been the victim of a serious crime." The validation from an objective authority, a detective with no personal stake in believing or disbelieving me, loosened something tight in my chest. Until that moment, some small part of me had continued to doubt my own perceptions, wondering if perhaps there was some truth to Michael and Becky's concerns that I simply couldn't recognize. "What happens next?" I asked. "We continue gathering evidence. Based on what we've documented already, we'll be seeking search warrants for your son's home and financial records. I should warn you, this may eventually lead to criminal charges." "I understand," I said quietly, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. After the call ended, Grace reviewed the legal landscape with clear-eyed pragmatism. "The criminal investigation adds significant weight to our civil case. The judge hearing the injunction matter will certainly take note of an active police investigation." "But it also raises the stakes," Harriet pointed out. "Michael and Becky must realize they're facing potential criminal charges. People can become desperate when cornered. As if manifesting her warning, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Is this really the legacy you want, Mom? Your son in jail? Your grandchildren with a father behind bars? You can still fix this. Call off the lawyers and police. We'll work something out. I showed the message to Grace, who immediately documented it and added it to our growing file. Intimidation, she noted. Not surprising, but ill-advised. This only strengthens our case. Yet despite the legal advantages, the message pierced me deeply. Was this what it had come to? My son threatening me, trying to use my love for him as a weapon against me? And what of my grandchildren? Tyler, who had risked his parents' anger to help me, and Sophia, just 13 and likely confused by the whole situation. I need some air, I said suddenly, rising from my chair. Just a short walk. Harriet looked concerned. Are you sure that's wise? If Michael knows you're with me? I won't go far, I promised. Just around the block. I need to clear my head. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. I walked slowly along the tree-lined street, auburn and gold leaves crunching beneath my feet. Couples passed, arm in arm. A young mother pushed a stroller, her baby, bundled against the autumn chill. Normal lives, untouched by the kind of betrayal that had shattered mine. How had I arrived at this point? My husband gone, my son conspiring against me, my home nearly stolen from under me. At 67, I had expected to be enjoying retirement, volunteering at the library, watching my grandchildren grow, perhaps even dating again after 3 years of widowhood. Instead, I was essentially a refugee, sleeping in my sister's guest room, fighting for my autonomy and assets. Yet beneath the grief and betrayal, something else was taking root, a steely determination I hadn't known I possessed. I had escaped. I had found help. I was fighting back. Whatever happened with Michael and Becky, whether reconciliation was ever possible, I would reclaim my life and rebuild on my own terms. As I rounded the corner back toward Harriet's building, a sleek black car slowed beside me. The passenger window lowered, and I froze as Becky's face appeared, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "Ellie, thank goodness," she said, her voice honeyed with fake relief. "We've been so worried. Please, get in. Let's talk about this misunderstanding." I stepped back, adrenaline surging. "There's no misunderstanding, Becky. The police are investigating. They know everything." Her facade slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of cold calculation before the mask of concern returned. "The police? Michael's worried sick, Ellie. He just wants to help you. We all do." By drugging me? By selling my house without my knowledge? By planning to institutionalize me based on a fabricated diagnosis? Each question emerged stronger than the last, my fear transmuting into righteous anger. The driver's door opened, and Michael stepped out, approaching slowly as if I were a skittish animal. "Mom, please. This has gotten out of hand. Let's go. Somewhere private and talk." "We have nothing to discuss except through our attorneys," I replied, backing toward Harriet's building. "And if you don't leave immediately, I'll call Detective Garcia and report this as harassment." Something shifted in Michael's expression, the mask of concerned son falling away to reveal a stranger's cold anger. "You'd really do this to your own family? Send me to jail? Leave your grandchildren without a father?" "You did this, Michael," I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. "You and Becky. You planned it all. The fake concern, the pills, the isolation. You were going to lock me away and take everything I spent a lifetime building. What kind of son does that to his mother?" "The kind who needed a solution," he snapped, mask fully discarded now. "Do you have any idea what we're facing? Becky lost her job. The market crashed. We're underwater on the house, drowning in debt. What were we supposed to do?" "Ask for help," I said simply. "I would have helped you if you'd asked." I'm your mother. Something flashed across his face. Regret? Shame? It disappeared too quickly to identify. Get in the car, Mom, he said, voice hardening again. We're going to fix this. Together. I saw then what fixing it meant in his mind. Get me away from Harriet, away from Grace, away from the police investigation. Somewhere he could control. The narrative again, perhaps with more of those yellow pills to ensure my compliance. No, I said firmly, continuing to back away. This ends now. I turned and rushed toward Harriet's building, fumbling for my key card to the lobby entrance. Behind me, I heard the quick footsteps of pursuit and felt a hand grasp my arm. Mom, stop being difficult, Michael hissed, fingers digging into my flesh. Let go of her. Harriet's voice rang out as she emerged from the building, phone in hand. I've already called 911, Michael. The police are on their way. He released me abruptly, looking from his aunt to me with an expression of desperation. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. None of you do. I understand perfectly, I replied, moving to stand beside Harriet. I'm protecting myself from people who tried to destroy me for their own gain, family or not. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Michael's face contorted with frustrated rage before he stepped back. This isn't over, he warned, retreating to the car. You'll regret this. As they drove away, I sagged against Harriet, the confrontation having drained what little energy I'd gathered during my walk. You're safe, she murmured, supporting me, as we moved inside. You stood your ground, Ellie. I'm so proud of you. But as the elevator carried us back to her apartment, I wondered if safe would ever be a concept I trusted again. My own son had just threatened me on a public street, had physically grabbed me in an attempt to force me into his car. The chasm between us now seemed not just unbridgeable, but bottomless. The court hearing on the house sale was scheduled for the next morning. As I prepared, reviewing notes with Grace, selecting appropriate clothes from Harriet's closet, practicing the calm demeanor I would need to project, I kept returning to Michael's words. This isn't over. No, I thought as I finally drifted toward uneasy sleep. It isn't over. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I'm no longer just a victim in someone else's story. I'm fighting back, reclaiming my narrative one court filing, one police report, one act of resistance at a time. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but I would face them standing tall, secure in the truth of who I was, not a confused old woman to be discarded and exploited, but Eleanor Jenkins, mother, teacher, survivor, a woman rediscovering her strength in the crucible of betrayal. The courthouse stood imposingly against the gray October sky, its granite steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps seeking justice. I climbed them slowly, Grace and Harriet flanking, me like sentinels. Inside, the polished corridors echoed with hushed conversations and the click of dress shoes on marble floors. The air smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. Judge Harmon is known for being thorough, Grace murmured as we approached the assigned courtroom. He'll want to hear directly from you, not just the lawyers. Remember, speak clearly. Answer only what's asked, and don't let emotions overwhelm your testimony. I nodded, smoothing the lapel of the borrowed navy blazer I wore over Harriet's cream blouse. I'd slept poorly, haunted by Michael's threat and the memory of his fingers digging into my arm. The bruises were hidden now beneath my sleeve, but their presence reminded me of exactly what was at stake. They're already here, Harriet warned, nodding toward the courtroom door where Michael and Becky stood conferring with a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Michael looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment before his attorney pulled his attention back to their conversation. Becky didn't acknowledge me at all, her posture rigid, face carefully composed into an expression of long-suffering concern. Matheson, Grace observed, noting the attorney. Expensive, aggressive, well-connected. They're pulling out all the stops. The observation should have intimidated me, but instead, it oddly bolstered my resolve. They wouldn't have hired such prominent legal representation if they weren't worried. Our evidence had them concerned. Courtroom 3B was smaller than I expected, with dark wood paneling and uncomfortable-looking benches. A handful of people already occupied seats: court personnel, a reporter from the local paper, and unexpectedly, Marcus, my neighbor of 2 decades, who gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. His presence touched me deeply. At least one person from my community believed me enough to show support. We took our seats on the plaintiff's side, the physical separation from Michael and Becky, a stark symbol of our fractured family. I kept my eyes forward, though I could feel their stares boring into my back. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Harmon entered, a tall black woman with silver-streaked hair and rectangular glasses that magnified her assessing gaze. She moved with deliberate precision, arranging papers on her bench before addressing the room. We're here regarding case number 35429, Jenkins versus Jenkins, on the matter of a temporary injunction halting the sale of residential property at 427 Magnolia Lane, she stated, looking over her glasses at the attorneys. I've reviewed the filings. From both parties, this is a concerning case with serious allegations on both sides. She turned toward me. Mrs. Jenkins, you contend that you never consented to sell your home, and that your son and daughter-in-law manufactured a false medical diagnosis to gain control of your assets. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice mercifully steady despite my racing heart. And Mr. Jenkins, she continued, shifting her gaze to my son, you maintain that your mother is suffering from cognitive decline, and that the sale was part of a care plan developed with medical consultation for her best interests? That's correct, Your Honor, Michael responded, his voice carrying the same concerned tone he'd perfected over months of gaslighting me. Judge Harmon nodded, her expression revealing nothing. Let's proceed. Ms. Sullivan, as the moving party, seeking continuation of the temporary injunction, you have the floor. Grace rose with calm confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. We're asking the court to extend the temporary injunction preventing the sale of Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins's home at 427 Magnolia Lane on the grounds that the sale was orchestrated through fraudulent means. Mrs. Jenkins never consented to sell her property. Instead, her son Michael Jenkins and daughter-in-law Rebecca Jenkins fabricated concerns about Mrs. Jenkins's cognitive health, isolated her from her support network, administered sedative medication without prescription or consent, and manipulated her into signing a power of attorney document. She proceeded to lay out our evidence methodically. Dr. Lawson's comprehensive cognitive assessment finding me entirely competent. The toxicology report identifying the yellow pills as non-prescribed sedatives. The confirmation that Dr. Morris had been on sabbatical during the period when Becky and Michael claimed he was treating me. The inconsistencies in the power of attorney, documentation, the suspicious financial transactions from my accounts. Most critically, Your Honor, she concluded, the power of attorney that Mr. Jenkins claims gives him authority to sell his mother's home specifically requires a physician's certification of incapacity to activate. No such certification exists, because Mrs. Jenkins is not incapacitated. This renders any actions taken under the presumed authority of that document legally invalid, including the home sale contract. Judge Harmon turned to Matheson. Counselor, your response? Michael's attorney rose smoothly, exuding practiced confidence. Your Honor, this case is ultimately about a loving family trying to provide proper care for an elderly mother experiencing cognitive decline. Mrs. Jenkins has indeed exhibited concerning behaviors over the past several months, documented by numerous witnesses including neighbors, friends, and family members. While we acknowledge there may be some procedural irregularities in the documentation, these stem from the family's urgent need to arrange appropriate care, not from any nefarious intent. He presented affidavits from neighbors describing my supposed confusion emphasizing the coffee pot incident and other minor mistakes that had been systematically weaponized against me. He questioned the validity of Dr. Lawson's assessment, suggesting it represented only a momentary period of lucidity rather than my general condition. As for the power of attorney, he continued, Mr. Jenkins was acting in good faith based on consultations with healthcare providers who expressed serious concerns about his mother's decision-making capacity. The house sale was arranged specifically to fund Mrs. Jenkins's ongoing care at a facility equipped to handle her condition. And these healthcare providers? Judge Harmon interrupted. Do you have documentation of their diagnoses? Matheson hesitated fractionally. We have statements from individuals who observed concerning behaviors, Your Honor. And while Dr. Morris has been temporarily unavailable, other medical professionals have been consulted. Names and credentials of these professionals? The judge pressed. Another hesitation. We're working to compile that documentation, Your Honor. Judge Harmon's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. Continue. For nearly an hour, the attorneys traded arguments, each picking apart the other's evidence. Grace highlighted the lack of actual medical documentation supporting Michael's claims about my cognitive state. Matheson emphasized the consistent pattern of concerning behaviors reported by various witnesses, attempting to paint Dr. Lawson's assessment as an outlier. Finally, Judge Harmon raised her hand, silencing both attorneys. I'd like to hear directly from Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Jenkins. She turned to me first. Mrs. Jenkins, please approach the stand. Heart pounding, I rose and made my way to the witness chair, conscious of every eye in the courtroom following my movements. After being sworn in, I sat with my hands folded in my lap, forcing myself to appear composed despite the churning anxiety in my stomach. Mrs. Jenkins, the judge began, her tone neutral. When did you first become aware that your home was being sold? On September 14th, I replied. Becky, my daughter-in-law, told me the house had already been sold and that I would be moving to Lakeview Senior Living the following week. And you had no prior knowledge of this sale? No discussions about listing the property or accepting offers? None whatsoever, Your Honor. I had no intention of selling my home. It's fully paid for, and I was managing it without difficulty. Your son and daughter-in-law have provided statements from neighbors and friends describing incidents of confusion, forgetfulness, and concerning behavior on your part. How do you respond to these reports? I took a deep breath. Some incidents did occur, Your Honor, like accidentally leaving a coffee pot on once. But these were isolated events, not a pattern of cognitive decline. Other incidents they've described either didn't happen or have been exaggerated and misrepresented. And the medication? Your attorney mentioned sedatives. Shortly after the coffee pot incident, Becky started bringing me pills she claimed were prescribed by Dr. Morris for blood pressure. They made me foggy, confused, and lethargic. I later discovered they were sedatives, not blood pressure medication, and Dr. Morris hadn't prescribed anything. He's been on sabbatical. Judge. Harmon studied me intently. Mrs. Jenkins, why do you believe your son and daughter-in-law would fabricate concerns about your health and attempt to sell your home without your knowledge? The question cut to the heart of the matter, the why that had tormented me since. Realizing the extent of their deception, I glanced briefly at Michael, whose expression remained carefully neutral. Based on information I've received, I believe financial pressure was the primary motivation. My daughter-in-law lost her job several months ago, creating strain on their finances. My home and savings represent substantial assets that would become accessible if I were declared incompetent. And how did you discover this alleged plan? It happened gradually. I began noticing inconsistencies in what they told me about doctor's appointments I supposedly had. Then I overheard Becky on the phone discussing plans to place me in a memory care facility and accessing my accounts. When I learned my house had been sold without my knowledge, I realized the full extent of what was happening. The questioning continued for another 20 minutes, with Judge Harmon pressing for specific details about the power of attorney, the sedative medication, and my escape from the situation. Throughout, I maintained my composure, answering clearly and directly as Grace had advised. When I was dismissed from the stand, Michael took my place. The contrast in our testimonies could not have been starker. Where I had spoken plainly about specific events and evidence, Michael wove emotional appeals about a son's concern for his declining mother. "We were desperate to help her, Your Honor," he said, his voice catching theatrically. "Mom was deteriorating. Before our eyes, but she wouldn't acknowledge it. The forgetfulness, the confusion, the mood swings. It was heartbreaking to witness." And yet, Judge Harmon observed, no formal medical diagnosis of cognitive impairment exists in the record. Dr. Morris, whom you've repeatedly referenced, has confirmed he hasn't seen your mother professionally in over 7 months and certainly didn't prescribe the medication she was receiving. Michael shifted uncomfortably. We consulted other medical professionals informally, and Becky researched extensively online about dementia symptoms. Online research does not constitute medical diagnosis, Mr. Jenkins, the judge noted dryly. What about the pills? Your mother's toxicology screening shows she was receiving benzodiazepines, powerful sedatives that could certainly cause the very symptoms you describe as evidence of cognitive decline. I didn't, Michael began, then recalibrated. Becky handled Mom's medications. I trusted her to follow medical advice. The subtle shift of blame toward Becky didn't escape anyone's notice. From my seat, I could see her stiffen, throwing a sharp glance at my son. And the house sale? Judge Harmon continued. Why proceed with that without ensuring proper legal authorization through an activated power of attorney? We believed we were acting within our rights, Michael insisted. Mom signed the power of attorney. We were told by... He hesitated. By whom, Mr. Jenkins? By legal counsel that we consulted informally, he finished lamely. The questioning continued, growing increasingly uncomfortable for Michael as Judge Harmon methodically highlighted the gaps and inconsistencies in his account. When she finally dismissed him, he returned to his seat, looking noticeably rattled. After brief closing arguments from both attorneys, Judge Harmon removed her glasses and addressed the court. This case presents troubling questions about elder care, family dynamics, and potential financial exploitation. Based on the evidence presented today, I find sufficient cause to extend the temporary injunction preventing the sale of the property at 427 Magnolia Lane indefinitely, pending further legal proceedings. Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly gasped. Furthermore, she continued, I am ordering a freeze on all financial accounts connected to Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, with the exception of a stipend for living expenses, until ownership and authorization can be properly established. Mr. Jenkins is hereby prohibited from exercising any authority under the disputed power of attorney until this court determines its validity. She fixed Michael with a stern gaze. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges related to elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. Both parties are ordered to preserve all evidence related to this matter. With a final tap of her gavel, Judge Harmon closed the hearing, and the tension that had been holding me upright released in a rush. I sagged slightly in my seat, feeling Harriet's steadying hand on my shoulder. We got everything we asked for, Grace whispered, gathering her documents. This is a significant victory, Ellie. Across the aisle, Matheson was speaking urgently to Michael and Becky, whose faces had drained of color at the mention of criminal charges. Becky appeared to be blaming Michael, gesturing angrily while keeping her voice low. The unity they had, presented earlier, was fracturing visibly under pressure. As we rose to leave, Marcus approached from his seat in the back of the courtroom. Ellie, he said, taking my hand awkwardly. I wanted to say I'm sorry. When Michael and Becky started talking about your memory problems, I believed them. I should have checked on you myself instead of taking their word for it. The simple apology, The first acknowledgement from anyone in my community that they had participated, however unwittingly, in my isolation, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for being here today," I said, squeezing his hand. "It means more than you know." Outside the courthouse, the crisp autumn air felt cleansing after the stale tension of the courtroom. Grace was explaining next steps, filing to invalidate the power of attorney permanently, cooperating with the criminal investigation, eventually pursuing civil damages, when Michael appeared at the top of the steps, alone. "Mom," he called, his voice stripped of the performative concern he'd displayed in court. "We need to talk." Harriet moved protectively closer to me, while Grace stepped forward. "Any communication should go through counsel, Mr. Jenkins." He ignored her, eyes fixed on me. "This has gone far enough. You've made your point. But if you continue down this road, with the criminal charges, the lawsuits, you'll destroy this family completely. Is that really what you want?" The naked attempt at manipulation, appealing to my love for family while dismissing the severity of what he'd done, ignited a quiet fury within me. "What family, Michael?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotion roiling beneath. "The one where my son conspired to have me declared incompetent? Where my daughter-in-law drugged me without my knowledge? Where my own child was willing to lock me away in a facility to gain access to my assets?" His expression hardened. "It wasn't like that. You're twisting everything." "The evidence speaks for itself," Grace interjected. "The sedatives, the fabricated medical concerns, the unauthorized financial transactions. Your mother isn't twisting anything." "Stay out of this," Michael snapped at her before turning back to me. "Mom, please. Think about Tyler and Sophia. Think about what this will do to them." The mention of my grandchildren sent a pang through my heart. They were innocent in all this, yet would inevitably suffer from the fallout of their parents' actions. "I am thinking of them," I said quietly. "I'm showing them that the truth matters, that actions have consequences, even when those actions are taken by people you love. That's a lesson their parents should have considered before hatching this scheme." Michael's facade cracked then, anger bleeding through. "You self-righteous?" He caught himself, visibly struggling for control. "You have no idea what we've been dealing with. The debt, the pressure. We were drowning." "Then you should have asked for help," I replied simply, echoing what I'd told him during our confrontation outside Harriet's apartment. "Instead, you chose to betray me in the most fundamental way possible. You tried to erase me, Michael, my autonomy, my voice, my very self. All for money." "It wasn't just about money," he protested, though his eyes shifted away from mine as he spoke, betraying the lie. "I think we're done here," Grace said firmly. "Mrs. Jenkins has nothing more to say to you outside of legal proceedings." As we turned to descend the courthouse steps, Michael called after me, desperation edging his voice. "What happens to me if I go to jail? Have you thought about that?" I paused, looking back at my son, this stranger wearing the face of the child I had raised, loved, nurtured. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "I've thought about it constantly. It breaks my heart. But your choices led us here, not mine." The drive back to Harriet's apartment passed in contemplative silence. The victory in court felt hollow against the backdrop of family destruction. I had secured my home and finances, but at what cost? The relationship with my son might be damaged beyond repair. My grandchildren would face the trauma of potentially seeing their father criminally charged, perhaps even incarcerated. "You did the right thing, Ellie," Harriet said finally, reaching across the back seat to take my hand. "Michael made his choices. Now he has to face the consequences." "I know," I sighed, watching raindrops begin to speckle the car windows, mirroring the tears I refused to shed. But knowing it's right doesn't make it hurt less. The following days brought a strange, suspended quality, like the pause between lightning and thunder, a moment of charged stillness before inevitable sound. The criminal investigation continued gathering momentum. Detective Garcia called regularly with updates, search warrants executed at Michael and Becky's home, financial records subpoenaed, the yellow pills officially identified as prescription, sedatives registered to one of Becky's friends. Grace worked tirelessly on the civil side, securing a formal invalidation of the power of attorney and initiating the process to recover funds that had been improperly transferred from my accounts. The house remained legally mine, the sale permanently blocked. But practical questions loomed. I couldn't stay with Harriet indefinitely. My home in Mapleton still contained most of my possessions, my garden, my life's accumulation of memories. Yet the thought of returning there alone, vulnerable to Michael and Becky's continued presence in town, filled me with unease. You could sell it legitimately, Harriet suggested as we discussed options over breakfast one morning. Use the proceeds to relocate somewhere new, somewhere without these painful associations. And let them win? I shook my head. That house is mine. I raised my family there. Will and I built that garden together, planted every rose bush, designed the stone paths. I won't be driven from my home by fear. Then you'll need support systems in place before you return, Grace advised during her next visit. Security measures, regular check-ins, community connections that can't be easily manipulated. The mention of community struck a chord. Before this ordeal, I'd been deeply connected to Mapleton, through my volunteer work at the library, my neighborhood friendships, my church. Michael and Becky had systematically severed those connections, isolating me to make their narrative about my decline more plausible. Reclaiming those connections seemed essential to reclaiming my life. I started with Marcus, whose courthouse appearance had meant so much. His call came as a surprise one afternoon, his gruff voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "The neighborhood isn't the same without you, Ellie," he said. "Several of us have been talking. We feel terrible about what happened, how we believed what Michael and Becky were saying without checking on you ourselves." "It was a sophisticated manipulation," I replied, finding forgiveness easier than expected. They presented a convincing story. "Still," he persisted, "we should have known better. Anyway, we've been thinking, whenever you're ready to come home, we want to help. Ruth and I can check on you daily. Jim and Eduardo can handle your lawn maintenance. Marjorie from the book club wants to drive you to the library for your volunteer shifts." The spontaneous offer of community support brought a lump to my throat. "I don't know what to say, Marcus. That's incredibly kind." "It's not kindness," he corrected. "It's making amends, and ensuring nothing like this can happen again because we'll all be watching out for you." That conversation sparked something within me, a recognition that rebuilding my life wasn't solely about legal victories or financial security. It was about reestablishing connections, creating a network too dense for anyone to manipulate or sever again. I began reaching out methodically, to my former colleagues from the school where I'd taught, to my church pastor, to the library director, to my bridge club members. Each call represented another strand in a web of support, another witness to my continuing competence and autonomy. Some conversations were awkward, laden with guilt or uncertainty about how to address what had happened. Others flowed more naturally, with genuine relief at hearing from me and eagerness to reconnect. Almost all expressed shock at learning the truth behind my apparent decline and subsequent disappearance. "We thought you'd moved to that fancy senior place," my bridge partner Margaret admitted. "Becky told us you were settling in nicely but weren't up for visitors yet. It seemed odd, but who questions a caring daughter-in-law?" "A lot of people going forward," I responded with newfound assertiveness. "That's how we protect vulnerable community members, by asking questions, by checking directly instead of accepting secondhand reports." With each conversation, each reconnection, I felt more of myself returning, Not just the pre-crisis Ellie, but someone stronger, more defined, more willing to advocate for herself and others. The trauma had changed me, certainly, but not in the way Michael and Becky had intended. Rather than diminishing me, it had ultimately amplified my voice and clarified my boundaries. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I received an unexpected call from Lakeview Senior Living, the very facility where Michael and Becky had planned to place me. "Mrs. Jenkins," began the administrator, Monica Patel, her voice professional but warm. "I understand there was an attempt to admit you to our memory care unit under concerning circumstances. I wanted to personally apologize. Had we known the true situation, we would never have reserved a place for you without direct consultation." The apology took me aback. "Thank you, Ms. Patel. I appreciate that. We've implemented additional protocols to prevent similar situations," she continued. "Mandatory in-person interviews with prospective residents, independent medical verification of cognitive assessments, direct contact with previous physicians. Your case has helped us identify vulnerabilities in our admissions process." After we hung up, I sat reflecting on this unexpected ripple effect. My ordeal might actually protect others from similar manipulation. The thought provided a measure of meaning amid the ongoing pain, a silver lining I could embrace without minimizing the trauma I'd experienced. The criminal investigation reached a critical juncture in late October. Detective Garcia requested an in-person meeting at the police station, where he informed me and Grace that the district attorney had decided to file formal charges against both Michael and Becky. Financial elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted false imprisonment, he listed, sliding the charging document across the table. Given the evidence we've gathered, particularly the medication issue and the documented planning, these charges reflect the seriousness of their actions. I stared at the official paper, seeing my son's name listed as defendant, the clinical language describing his crimes against me. Despite knowing this was coming, seeing it in black and white sent a shudder through me. "What happens next?" I asked, my mouth dry. "They'll be formally arrested, arraigned, and will enter pleas," Garcia explained. "Given their lack of prior criminal records and community ties, they'll likely be released on bail pending trial." "And if convicted?" Though I already knew the answer, some part of me needed to hear it spoken aloud. "The charges carry potential sentences of up to 7 years incarceration," he said gently. "Though first-time offenders typically receive less than the maximum, especially in white-collar cases. 7 years. My son could spend 7 years in prison for what he'd done to me. My grandchildren could spend their formative teenage years with their father incarcerated." The weight of it pressed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. "Mrs. Jenkins," Detective Garcia continued, perhaps sensing my distress, "I want you to understand that the decision to prosecute isn't solely in your hands. The state considers elder abuse a serious crime against society, not just against individual victims. Even if you wish to drop charges, the district attorney would likely proceed based on the evidence." The information was both burden and relief, removing the pressure of decision from my shoulders while confirming the gravity of what Michael and Becky had done. This wasn't just a family matter, a private betrayal. It was a crime serious enough that the state would pursue justice regardless of my personal feelings. As Grace and I left the police station, a local news van was parked outside, a reporter I vaguely recognized from the courthouse approaching with microphone extended. "Mrs. Jenkins, can we get your reaction to the charges against your son and daughter-in-law? How does it feel to be betrayed by your own family?" Grace stepped between us smoothly. "Mrs. Jenkins has no comment at this time. This remains an ongoing legal matter, and we ask that you respect her privacy during this difficult period." But the encounter signaled a new phase of my ordeal: public scrutiny. What had been a private trauma was becoming a community story, A cautionary tale of elder exploitation splashed across local media. That evening, alone in Harriet's guest room, I found myself staring at old family photos on my phone. Michael's college graduation, Tyler's birth, family vacations at the lake, holiday gatherings where smiles seemed genuine and connections real. Had it all been illusion? Had the bonds I thought unbreakable always been conditional, vulnerable to financial pressure? I lingered on a particular image. Michael at 4, sitting on Will's shoulders at the county fair, cotton candy in one hand, his other tiny palm resting trustingly on his father's head for balance. His face was pure joy, mine watching from behind, the camera full of maternal love. Where had that little boy gone? What series of choices, compromises, and rationalizations had transformed him into someone capable of such calculated betrayal? No answers came, only the growing certainty that regardless of the legal outcomes, I needed to reclaim my life on my terms. Not just my assets and autonomy, but my purpose, my joy, my sense of self beyond victim or survivor. The next morning, I announced my decision to Harriet over coffee. I'm going home, next week, back to Mapleton, back to my house. She studied me carefully. Are you sure that's wise? With charges just filed, Michael and Becky might be desperate. That's exactly why I need to go now, I explained. I refuse to live in exile from my own life while the legal process drags on for months or even years. I have support systems in place, Marcus and the neighbors, the library community, my church, and I'll take proper security precautions. Harriet still looked concerned, but nodded slowly. It's your decision, but I'm coming with you for the first week, at least until you're settled. The plan took shape quickly. Grace arranged for a security assessment of my home and installation of cameras and improved locks. Marcus coordinated with neighbors to establish a check-in system. The library director enthusiastically welcomed me back to my volunteer position, suggesting I might consider leading a new program on elder rights and resources. Each arrangement, each reconnection, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, not just returning to who I'd been before, but establishing a new identity forged in the crucible of betrayal and resilience. Eleanor Jenkins. Not just mother, grandmother, retired teacher, widow, but advocate, survivor, rebuilder of broken boundaries. A week before my planned return to Mapleton, Tyler called, his voice tight with emotion. Grandma, have you heard? Dad and Mom are being arraigned tomorrow. It's all over school. Everyone knows. My heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Tyler. This must be incredibly difficult for you and Sophia. Dad says if you would just drop the charges, this could all go away, he said, his tone carefully neutral, not pressuring, but clearly repeating a message he'd been given. He says, you have the power to stop this. Tyler, I began gently. The criminal charges aren't mine to drop. The district attorney is pursuing this case based on evidence of serious crimes. I understand your father is telling you otherwise, but he's not being truthful about how the legal system works. A pause. Then, yeah, that's what I figured. Dad hasn't been truthful about a lot of things lately. The maturity in his assessment startled me. Sophia's really struggling, though. She doesn't understand why you're doing this to Dad. Would it help if I talked to her? I offered, though the prospect of trying to explain such complex betrayal to a 13-year-old daunted me. Maybe. Not right now, though. She's pretty angry at everyone. Another pause. Grandma, when this is all over, whatever happens with Dad and Mom, will you still be our grandmother? Will we still be family? The question broke my heart with its vulnerability. Tyler, nothing could ever change that. Not court cases or legal battles or anything else. You and Sophia will always be my grandchildren, and I will always love you no matter what. His relieved exhale was audible. That's what I hoped you'd say. I'll tell Sophia. It might help. After we hung up, I sat contemplating the ripple effects of Michael and Becky's actions, how their betrayal had created impossible situations for their children, caught between loyalty to parents and recognition of wrongdoing. Whatever happened with the criminal case, whatever sentence might eventually be imposed, Tyler and Sophia were already serving their own kind of punishment, navigating a landscape of broken trust and public shame they'd done nothing to deserve. Yet even amid that painful recognition, I found myself more certain than ever about returning home. My grandchildren needed to see resilience modeled, needed to witness the possibility of rebuilding after betrayal. They needed to know that their grandmother remained a constant in their lives, despite the chaos their parents had created. As Harriet and I packed for the return to Mapleton, I found myself looking forward rather than backward, not forgetting the trauma or dismissing its impact, but refusing to let it define my future. I had lost my naive trust in family bonds, gained a clearer understanding of human capacity for exploitation, and developed stronger boundaries and support systems. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring further challenges: the criminal proceedings against Michael and Becky, the complex process of potentially rebuilding relationships with my grandchildren, the emotional work of healing from such profound betrayal. But for the first time since discovering the house sale, I faced that future not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her power step by deliberate step. "Ready?" Harriet asked, suitcase in hand as we prepared to leave for Mapleton. I thought of my garden waiting for attention, my library patrons missing their story lady, my neighbors standing ready to welcome me home. I thought of the house keys in my pocket, the legal documents confirming my rightful ownership, the security system that would help me sleep at night. I thought of my grandchildren, navigating their own difficult path parallel to mine. "Ready," I confirmed, stepping forward into whatever came next. Not without fear, but with the hard-won knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Coming home felt like entering a familiar dream altered by some subtle, disquieting change. The Victorian house stood just as I remembered: white clapboard with green shutters, wraparound porch with the swing Will had built 30 years earlier, maple tree in the front yard now ablaze with autumn colors. Yet knowing what had nearly happened, how close I'd come to losing it forever, cast everything in a different light. "Your roses need attention," Harriet observed as we approached the front door, nodding toward the garden beds where my prized heirlooms had grown wild in my absence. "They've survived worse," I replied, thinking of the particularly harsh winter 3 years ago when I'd feared losing the entire collection. "They're remarkably resilient." The metaphor wasn't lost on either of us. The new keys felt strange in my hand, a physical reminder of the security upgrades Grace had arranged: smart locks, security cameras, motion-sensing lights, and a monitoring system linked directly to the local police station. Practical precautions against the unthinkable. My own son attempting to force his way in. Inside, the house echoed with emptiness. Everything appeared untouched since my escape weeks earlier, frozen in time like a museum exhibit of my interrupted life. Half-read books still marked with bookmarks, mail still stacked neatly on the entry table, dishes still drying in the rack beside the sink. Only a fine layer of dust suggested the passage of time. Marcus had turned off the water main when I'd left, so Harriet busied herself restoring utilities while I moved slowly from room to room, reacquainting myself with my home. In the living room, family photos still lined the mantel, including several of Michael that now sent a pang through my heart. Should I put them away? It seemed wrong to erase him from the visual narrative of my life, yet equally wrong to maintain the pretense that nothing had changed. I was still contemplating this when the doorbell rang. Through the new security camera feed visible on my phone, I saw Marcus and Ruth on the porch, bearing what appeared to be a casserole dish and flowers. "Welcome home," Ruth said warmly as I opened the door, brushing past any awkwardness to envelop me in a gentle hug. "We've missed you terribly." "The whole neighborhood has," Marcus added, presenting the flowers, a lovely arrangement of autumn blooms. Consider this the first of many welcome-back gestures. Everyone's been asking when you'd return. They came. In for coffee, bringing me up to date on neighborhood happenings with deliberate normalcy that I found unexpectedly comforting. Mrs. Abernathy's cat had climbed the big oak on Elm Street and required rescue by the fire department. The Thompsons' youngest had won a regional science fair. Eduardo and Jim had finally finished renovating their kitchen after months of takeout meals and dust. Beneath the pleasant chatter lay unspoken understanding. They knew what had happened, knew about Michael and Becky's charges, knew I was still navigating the aftershocks of betrayal. But rather than addressing it directly, they offered the gift of ordinary friendship, creating a pocket of normalcy in what had become an extraordinarily abnormal life. After they left, promising to return the next day to help with the garden, Harriet regarded me thoughtfully. "You have good friends here." "I'm rediscovering that," I agreed, surprising myself with a genuine smile. "It helps to remember there's more to my life in Mapleton than what Michael and Becky tried to destroy." That first night back, I slept fitfully despite the security system and Harriet's presence down the hall. Every creaking floorboard, every rustle of branches against windows sent me into momentary alertness. The rational part of my mind knew Michael and Becky wouldn't risk violating the restraining order Grace had secured, especially with criminal charges pending. But rationality provided little comfort against the visceral memory of betrayal. Morning brought gentle rain and another visitor, Library Director Patricia Chen, bearing fresh scones and determination. "The Tuesday Storytime children have been asking about you constantly," she announced after pleasantries were exchanged. "We've had substitutes, but no one does the voices like you do. When do you think you might feel up to returning?" The direct question, devoid of pity or hesitation, refreshed me. Here was someone treating me as a valued contributor rather than a victim to be handled delicately. "Would next week be too soon?" I asked, finding myself eager to reclaim this piece of my former routine. Patricia beamed. "Perfect. I'll put you on the schedule. And when you're ready, I'd like to discuss that elder rights program we talked about on the phone. I think your perspective would be invaluable." She left me with renewed purpose and a date on my calendar. Concrete evidence that life continued beyond trauma, that I still had contributions to make. Throughout that first week home, similar reconnections unfolded. Pastor Thomas from First Methodist arrived with church newsletters and an invitation to rejoin the hospitality committee. My bridge club sent a collective card expressing support and suggesting weekly games could resume whenever I felt ready. The garden club volunteered en masse to help restore my neglected roses to their former glory. These gestures, practical, specific, focused on my abilities rather than my victimhood, formed the scaffolding of my rebuilding process. Each commitment I made, each routine I reclaimed, felt like another step away from the identity of elder, abuse victim, and back toward Eleanor Jenkins, community member, volunteer, gardener, friend. Not all interactions proved so positive, of course. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the criminal charges against Michael and Becky, complete with quotes from sources close to the family, who questioned whether I might indeed have cognitive issues that had been overlooked in the legal proceedings. The grocery store checkout line became an exercise in composure as I pretended not to notice whispers and stares. Even church on Sunday brought uncomfortable moments when certain congregation members pointedly avoided eye contact or conversation. "People don't know what to say," Harriet observed as we drove home from services. "They're afraid of saying the wrong thing, so they say nothing at all. Or they secretly wonder if Michael and Becky might be right," I added quietly. If a respectable financial advisor and real estate agent could sincerely believe their mother-in-law was declining, mightn't there be some truth to it? Harriet snorted derisively. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes talking with you would... No, that's absurd. Your mind is sharper than most people half your age. But that's just it. Many of them aren't spending those 5 minutes. They're avoiding direct interaction altogether. The observation gave me pause, illuminating the next challenge in my recovery. If I wanted to truly reclaim my place in the community, I couldn't wait passively for others to overcome their discomfort. I needed to engage directly, to demonstrate through consistent presence and participation that I remained fully capable and connected. This realization sparked a deliberate strategy. I resumed my regular coffee date at the Blue Kettle Cafe, where conversation with the owner, Darlene, naturally attracted other regular patrons. I accepted an invitation to speak at the Rotary Club about the library's literacy initiatives. I volunteered to host the Garden Club's monthly meeting, showcasing my revitalized rose garden while subtly demonstrating my intact homemaking and organizational skills. Each public appearance, each normal interaction, served as living testimony to my competence. Gradually, the awkward avoidances diminished. Conversations became more natural. The cloud of suspicion thinned, if never quite dissipating completely. Meanwhile, the legal machinery ground forward with ponderous inevitability. Michael and Becky were arraigned, pleading not guilty to all charges in a courtroom I deliberately avoided attending. Their legal team filed motions to suppress certain evidence, including the yellow pills, arguing chain of custody issues. The prosecutor responded with additional documentation, including pharmacy records showing Becky had filled a prescription for the sedatives using her friend's name. Grace kept me informed of each development while respecting my request not to be more involved than absolutely necessary. "They're hoping to negotiate a plea deal," she reported during one of our regular update calls. "The prosecutor is willing to consider it, given the lack of prior criminal history, but any agreement would likely still involve some incarceration for both of them." The prospect of my son serving jail time continued to tear at me, despite all he had done. "And if it goes to trial?" I asked. "Based on the evidence gathered so far, conviction seems highly probable," Grace replied carefully. "And sentencing would likely be more severe than what a plea agreement would offer." The information weighed heavily, complicating my already conflicted emotions. I wanted justice, accountability for what they'd done. But I also carried the inherent maternal instinct to protect my child, however adult and culpable he might be. Could I truly wish imprisonment on my only son? Could I face my grandchildren knowing I had participated in a process that took their father away, however justified? These questions haunted my quieter moments, intruding on the progress I was making in other areas of recovery. I discussed them with Dr. Sandra Morris, a therapist Grace had recommended, who specialized in elder trauma and family betrayal. "You're caught in a false dichotomy," she suggested during one of our weekly sessions. "You're positioning this as your responsibility, your choice, either pursue justice or protect your son. But Michael created this situation through his own actions. The consequences he faces result from those choices, not from your decision to protect yourself." Intellectually, I recognized the truth in her words, but emotions rarely yield to intellectual understanding alone, especially when they involve such primal bonds as mother and child. "I keep thinking about Tyler and Sophia," I admitted. "Whatever Michael has done, they're innocent in all this. Yet they'll bear such a heavy burden if he goes to prison." Dr. Morris nodded thoughtfully. "Have you had any direct contact with them since returning to Mapleton?" "No," I sighed. Grace advised against it until the custody situation is clarified. If Michael and Becky both serve time, there will need to be formal guardianship arrangements. "That makes practical sense for now," she acknowledged. "But eventually, maintaining connection with your grandchildren, separate from the conflict with their parents, will be important for both your healing and theirs. Children are remarkably resilient when given honest, age-appropriate explanations and consistent support." Her words stayed with me, reinforcing my determination to remain a positive presence in Tyler and Sophia's lives despite the painful circumstances. I began setting aside special items I thought might comfort them during the difficult transitions ahead. photo albums of happier times, small keepsakes that held family memories, journals where they might process their complex emotions. 3. Weeks after my return to Mapleton, an unexpected visitor arrived. Through the security camera, I recognized Becky's mother, Judith Walsh, standing anxiously on my front porch. We had never been close, her cool politeness at family gatherings barely masking her disapproval of Michael's choice to live in a small, provincial town, rather than pursuing opportunities in larger cities as she'd apparently envisioned for her daughter and son-in-law. My instinct was to ignore the doorbell, but curiosity won out. With the security chain engaged, I opened the door partially. "Eleanor," she began, her normally confident demeanor subdued. "I hope I'm not intruding. I need to speak with you." "This isn't a good idea, Judith," I replied, keeping my tone neutral but firm. "Given the pending legal matters, any communication should go through our attorneys." "Please," she pressed, an unexpected note of desperation entering her voice. "This isn't about the case. It's about Tyler and Sophia. They need their grandmother." The mention of my grandchildren weakened my resolve. I unlatched the chain and gestured her inside, leading her to the living room where we sat across from each other like formal acquaintances rather than family members of over 20 years. "Rebecca and Michael will likely accept the plea agreement," she said without preamble, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. 2 years for Rebecca, 3 for Michael, with possibility of parole. The formal sentencing is next week. The confirmation that my son would indeed go to prison sent a fresh wave of grief through me, despite my having intellectually prepared for this outcome. "I see," I managed. "And the children?" "That's why I'm here," Judith continued. "Robert and I are filing for guardianship. We've hired an attorney to handle the paperwork, but Tyler and Sophia keep asking about you, especially Tyler. He's been difficult since all this started. Angry, withdrawn. He argues constantly with Rebecca and Michael, says he doesn't believe anything they tell him anymore." This glimpse into my grandson's emotional state both pained and relieved me, evidence that his natural sense of justice remained intact despite his parents' corruption. "What exactly are you asking of me, Judith?" I prompted when she fell silent. She straightened her shoulders slightly. "We're asking for your support of our guardianship petition. The court will consider family stability, and having both sets of grandparents in agreement would strengthen our case." "And the children's relationship with me? Would you facilitate regular visits, phone calls, holidays?" A slight hesitation preceded her answer. "Of course, within reason. They'll be living with us in Chicago, which makes frequent visits challenging. But we could arrange holidays and perhaps a week in the summer. The geographical distance, Mapleton to Chicago, nearly 6 hours by car, wasn't accidental, I suspected. It would effectively minimize my ongoing presence in Tyler and Sophia's lives." "That seems quite limited," I observed, "especially given that this arrangement might last for several years during a critical developmental period for both children." Judith's expression tightened. "Being practical, Eleanor, they need stability after the upheaval they've experienced. Constant transitions between households would only add stress. Yet losing regular contact with a loving grandparent creates its own kind of stress, doesn't it?" I countered, keeping my voice gentle despite the steel entering my spine. "Particularly when that relationship has been consistent throughout their lives." Something shifted in Judith's demeanor, the veneer of collaborative concern giving way to a more transparent calculation. "Let me be frank. The children's lives have been turned upside down because you pursued charges against their parents. Michael and Rebecca made mistakes, serious ones, but a mother with true compassion would have found another way to address the situation without destroying her son's family. The accusations struck with precision, targeting my deepest vulnerabilities. Wasn't this exactly what had tormented me through sleepless nights? The question of whether I could have found some middle path that protected me without devastating my grandchildren's stability? But Dr. Morris's words returned to me, the false dichotomy, the misplaced responsibility. I hadn't created this situation. Michael and Becky had made deliberate choices with clear foreknowledge of potential consequences. A mother with true compassion doesn't attempt to institutionalize her son's mother under false pretenses to access her assets, I replied steadily. A mother with true compassion doesn't help prey on vulnerable elderly individuals for financial gain. The destruction of Michael's family stems directly from his and Rebecca's actions, not from my decision to protect myself from their abuse. Judith flushed. You have no idea what pressures they were under. Rebecca's job loss, the investment. That went wrong. None of which justifies what they did, I interrupted, with more firmness than I'd known I possessed. Many families face financial difficulties without resorting to elder abuse and fraud. She stood abruptly. I can see this was a mistake. We had hoped to reach an amicable arrangement for the children's sake, but clearly you're still too angry for reasonable discussion. I rose as well, maintaining eye contact. I'm not angry, Judith. I'm clear-eyed about what happened and determined to remain a positive presence in my grandchildren's lives. I won't support a guardianship arrangement that effectively cuts me out of their lives. In fact, I'll be consulting with my attorney about filing for shared guardianship. Her eyes widened in alarm. You wouldn't. I absolutely would. Tyler and Sophia deserve to maintain relationships with all their grandparents during this difficult time. I believe the court would agree. After Judith departed, promising further legal confrontation while ironically accusing me of creating unnecessary conflict, I called Grace immediately to discuss guardianship options. To my surprise, she had already been researching the matter. I anticipated this might become an issue once sentencing was determined, she explained. Given your established relationship with the children and your proven competence, you have a strong case for at least shared guardianship. The geographical challenge is significant but not insurmountable. Judith and Robert want to take them to Chicago, I said. The distance still troubling me. 6 hours away. The court generally prefers to maintain children's established communities whenever possible. School, friends, support networks. We could make a compelling argument that Tyler and Sophia would be better served remaining in Mapleton, with you, as primary guardian and the Walshes having visitation rights. The possibility of having my grandchildren live with me, of providing the stable home they would desperately need during their parents' incarceration, sparked both hope and trepidation. At 67, did I have the energy to raise teenagers? Could I navigate the complex emotions they would inevitably experience? Would they resent me for my role in their parents' legal troubles? Yet the alternative, them being whisked to Chicago, effectively separated from me and from the community they'd known their entire lives, seemed clearly worse. Let's pursue it, I decided. Not out of spite toward Judith and Robert, but because it truly seems best for Tyler and Sophia to maintain as much stability as possible. The decision marked another milestone in my recovery journey. From victim, fighting to protect herself, to advocate fighting to protect others. The passive elder Michael and Becky had tried to erase had been replaced by a woman willing to engage in legal battles, not just for her own rights, but for the well-being of those she loved. This newfound strength was tested repeatedly in the mighty weeks that followed. The local media covered Michael and Becky's plea agreement and sentencing, reigniting public interest in the case. The Mapleton Herald ran a surprisingly thoughtful feature article titled Elder Fraud, a Growing Crisis, using my case as a launching point for a broader discussion of financial exploitation within families. I declined direct interviews, but provided a brief statement emphasizing the importance of community vigilance and elder autonomy. The guardianship battle intensified, with Judith and Robert Walsh filing formal paperwork claiming I was emotionally unsuitable to care for the children given my vengeful pursuit of criminal charges against their parents. Grace countered with testimonials from community members, documentation of my long-standing positive relationship with Tyler and Sophia, and evidence of my stable home environment. Most significantly, both Tyler and Sophia were interviewed by The court-appointed guardian ad litem, an attorney assigned to represent their best interests in the proceedings. Tyler, now 17, expressed a clear preference to remain in Mapleton with me. Sophia, at 14, was more conflicted, torn between loyalty to her maternal grandparents and her desire to stay in her familiar school and community. Through it all, I maintained the difficult balance of defending my rights while remaining open to compromise that would truly serve my grandchildren's needs. When Grace suggested we propose a joint guardianship arrangement, with the children living primarily with me during school years and with the Walshes during summer and certain holidays, I readily agreed despite my reservations about working with Judith. "It's not about me or them," I explained to Dr. Morris during a therapy session. "It's about creating the most supportive environment possible for Tyler and Sophia during an impossible situation. That requires all of us to set aside personal grievances and focus on their needs." "That's remarkably generous given how Judith approached you," Dr. Morris observed. I considered this. Perhaps. But I've learned something important through this whole ordeal. Holding on to anger, even justified. Anger ultimately diminishes me more than anyone else. I can acknowledge the harm done without letting it determine my responses moving forward. This philosophical shift extended beyond the guardianship issue to my broader approach to recovery. I began to recognize that true healing wasn't about forgetting the betrayal or minimizing its impact, but about refusing to let it define my identity or limit my future choices. In practical terms, this meant continuing to build security measures into my life while not allowing them to isolate me from community engagement. It meant acknowledging the ongoing legal processes without letting them consume my daily focus. It meant maintaining appropriate boundaries with Michael and Becky while remaining open to eventual healing if genuine remorse and changed behavior emerged. Most importantly, it meant redefining myself not as a victim of elder abuse, but as a survivor who had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more determined to use my experience to help others. This redefinition took tangible form when Patricia Chen approached me about expanding the proposed elder rights program at the library into a comprehensive community education initiative. "We've secured grant funding," she explained excitedly, as we discussed the project over lunch at the Blue Kettle. "Enough to develop materials, host monthly workshops, and train volunteers to serve as elder advocates. Would you consider directing the program?" The offer took me by surprise. "Me? Patricia, I'm not sure I have the qualifications." "You have exactly the qualifications we need," she interrupted firmly. "Lived experience, community connections, teaching background, and most importantly, the courage to speak openly about what happened to you. Your story could help others recognize warning signs before situations escalate to where yours did." The prospect of transforming my personal trauma into community benefit appealed deeply. I would need to learn more about the legal aspects, resources available. Of course. The grant includes funding for professional development. We'd connect you with elder law specialists, social service agencies, healthcare advocates. You wouldn't be doing this alone. Not alone. The phrase resonated, highlighting how far I'd come from those terrifying days of isolation engineered by Michael and Becky. Now I had a network of support, legal, emotional, community-based, that could never be easily severed again. "I'll do it," I decided. "When can we start?" As autumn deepened toward winter, various threads of my new life began weaving together into a coherent pattern. The family court judge ruled in favor of the joint guardianship arrangement, with specific provisions ensuring my regular involvement in Tyler and Sophia's lives regardless of their primary residence. After much negotiation, we agreed they would stay with me in Mapleton to finish the current school year before relocating to Chicago, with the arrangement reassessed annually based on their needs and preferences. The Elder Rights Program launched with a well-attended workshop on financial protection, featuring a panel that included Grace, Detective Garcia, and a local banker specializing in seniors' accounts. I shared elements of my experience, focusing not on the family betrayal aspect, but on the practical signs I'd missed and the preventative measures others could implement. My garden entered its winter dormancy, roses carefully mulched against, the coming cold, perennials cut back, spring bulbs planted as tangible investments in future beauty. Marcus and Eduardo helped me install raised beds that would be easier to maintain as I aged, a practical acknowledgement of physical limitations that felt like wisdom rather than surrender. In quieter moments, I still struggled with the complexity of emotions surrounding Michael. Grief for what was lost, anger at his betrayal, concern for his well-being in prison, uncertainty about whether our relationship could ever heal. Dr. Morris assured me this ambivalence was normal, a natural response to the severing of such a fundamental bond. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me during a particularly difficult session after I received Michael's first letter from prison, a strange mixture of apology and self-justification that left me more confused than comforted. Some days will feel like progress, others like sliding backward. Both are part of the journey. I carried this perspective into the holiday season, traditionally a time of family togetherness now transformed by absence and change. Rather than trying to recreate past celebrations or ignoring the season entirely, I chose to establish new traditions, hosting a Thanksgiving dinner for neighbors who would otherwise be alone, volunteering at the community Christmas concert, planning a special New Year's Eve sleepover with Tyler and Sophia before they would leave for their first extended stay with the Walshes. We're all learning how to navigate this new reality, I told my grandchildren as we decorated my Christmas tree with the handmade ornaments they'd created throughout their childhood. It won't be easy, and sometimes it will hurt, but we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. Tyler, taller than me now and increasingly resembling his father at the same age, paused while hanging a glitter-covered pine cone he'd made in second grade. Do you ever wish you could go back, to before everything happened? The question carried layers of meaning. Was he asking if I regretted my actions? If I missed the illusion of family harmony? If I blamed myself for the disruption of their lives? I considered carefully before answering. I wish your parents had made different choices. I wish none of us had to experience this pain. But going back would mean living in a falsehood, being vulnerable to harm, losing the strength and clarity I've gained. So no, I don't wish to go back. I wish we could have all moved forward without this particular journey, but since that wasn't possible, I'm focusing on creating something meaningful from where we are now. Sophia, quieter and more reserved since the sentencing, looked up from arranging nativity figures on the mantel. Dad says he's sorry in his letters. Do you think he really means it? Another layered question requiring thoughtful navigation. I believe he regrets the consequences, I said carefully. Whether he truly understands the harm his actions caused is something that will take time to determine. People can change, can learn from terrible mistakes, but that change requires honest acknowledgement of responsibility without excuses or blame shifting. Like when I blamed Tyler for breaking Mom's vase, but really I knocked it over and was too scared to admit it, Sophia offered unexpectedly. I acted sorry when I got caught but didn't really feel bad about lying, just about getting in trouble. Her insight, so simply expressed yet profound in its self-awareness, gave me hope. If my 14-year-old granddaughter could recognize the difference between regret for consequences and genuine remorse, perhaps all of us could eventually navigate toward authentic healing. Exactly like that, I agreed. Except with much bigger stakes and deeper hurt. It takes courage to acknowledge when we've wronged someone, doesn't it? She nodded solemnly. I wrote Mom that I was mad at her for what she did to you. Dad, too. My counselor said it's okay to love someone and still be angry about their bad choices. Your counselor is very wise, I said, drawing her into a gentle hug. It's possible to hold both those feelings at once, though it isn't always easy. As we continued decorating, sharing memories attached to various ornaments, I felt a sense of perspective emerging from the past months of turmoil. My life had been fundamentally altered by betrayal, but not defined by it. Through the painful dismantling of what I'd thought was secure, I'd discovered resilience I hadn't known I possessed, connections deeper than I'd realized, and purpose that transcended personal trauma. The path forward remained uncertain, marked by both painful challenges and unexpected possibilities. Michael and Becky would eventually complete their sentences and re-enter society. My relationship with my grandchildren would continue evolving, through their adolescence and into adulthood. My role in the community would expand through the Elder Rights Program and whatever other opportunities emerged. None of it would follow the life trajectory I'd once envisioned. But standing in my living room, surrounded by the tangible symbols of continuity and change, family ornaments on the tree, new security features on the doors and windows, grandchildren growing into their own wisdom despite their parents' failures, I recognized that the story wasn't finished. The traumatic chapter that had begun with betrayal was giving way to a new narrative, one I was actively helping to write rather than passively experiencing. And in that recognition lay perhaps the greatest healing of all, the knowledge that, while I couldn't control what had been done to me, I retained full authority over how I responded, who I became, and what meaning I created from the experience. The victory wasn't in erasing the trauma, but in refusing to let it have the final word in the ongoing story of Eleanor Jenkins. 18 months after the day I found myself watching strangers move into what was almost no longer my home, I stood in the community room of the Mapleton Library, surveying the crowd that had gathered for our Elder Rights Awareness Day. The event marked the 1-year anniversary of the program Patricia and I had launched, a milestone few would have thought possible during those dark days when my own son had nearly succeeded in erasing my autonomy, my property, and my very identity. "Quite a turnout," Patricia whispered, appearing beside me with a stack of additional handouts. "We may need to bring in more chairs." Indeed, every seat was filled, with people still filtering in. Seniors of various ages, caregivers, social workers, law enforcement representatives, and, most encouragingly, young people from the high school's community service program. Among them sat Tyler, now 18 and preparing for college, who had become one of our most dedicated volunteers, despite splitting his time between Mapleton and Chicago. "Mrs. Jenkins?" A tremulous voice drew my attention to an elderly woman, clutching one of our brochures. "Could I speak with you privately after the presentation? My niece has been insisting I move to assisted living, but something doesn't feel right about how she's approaching it." "Of course," I assured her, recognizing the fear behind her hesitation. "That's exactly why we're here." Such conversations had become increasingly common as word spread about our program. What had begun as a small initiative focused on education had expanded to include a hotline, monthly support groups, volunteer advocates who accompanied seniors, to medical and legal appointments, and partnerships with local banks to identify suspicious financial activity. The growth hadn't been without challenges. Some community members still viewed me through the lens of the scandalous court case involving my son. Others questioned whether highlighting elder abuse risks might damage family relationships or promote paranoia among seniors. And occasionally, individuals like Michael and Becky's former friends would deliberately avoid events where I was speaking, unwilling to confront the uncomfortable reality of what they had tacitly enabled through their belief in manufactured concerns about my cognitive state. Yet for every lingering skeptic, dozens more had embraced our message of empowerment through awareness and community vigilance. Cases similar to mine had been identified and addressed before reaching crisis points. Seniors who might have suffered in isolation found supportive networks and practical resources. The conversation around aging and autonomy in Mapleton had fundamentally shifted. Detective Garcia, our keynote speaker for the day, approached the podium to share statistics and case studies demonstrating why elder protection required community-wide commitment. As he spoke, I found myself reflecting on the paradoxical journey that had led to this moment. How the very experience designed to diminish me had ultimately expanded my impact beyond anything I could have imagined in my previous life. The Eleanor. Jenkins, who had existed before Michael and Becky's betrayal, the accommodating mother, the background-dwelling grandmother, the retired teacher quietly volunteering at the library, would never have envisioned herself as a program director, public speaker, an advocate whose story had been featured in regional news and elder rights publications. That Eleanor might have continued indefinitely in her comfortable routines, valuable in her small sphere but largely invisible in the broader community. Instead, the crucible of betrayal had burned away certain limitations I hadn't even recognized, were constraining me. The habit of prioritizing others' comfort above my own truth, the reluctance to claim space or challenge authority, the tendency to discount my own experiences and insights. What remained after that painful refinement was a woman more definite in her boundaries, more confident in her voice, more purposeful in her actions. And now, Detective Garcia concluded, I'd like to introduce someone who transformed her personal trauma into community empowerment. Eleanor Jenkins not only survived an elaborate elder exploitation attempt, but has created resources to protect others from similar experiences. Eleanor? Applause accompanied my walk to the podium. I no longer needed notes for these presentations. The words flowed naturally after countless tellings. Yet I never shared my story by rote. Each time I focused on making genuine connection with new listeners who might recognize warning signs in their own lives or communities. 2 years ago, I began. I was a 67-year-old widow living independently in the home I'd shared with my late husband. I had a close relationship with my son, volunteer work I enjoyed, and what I thought was a secure future. What I didn't have was awareness of how quickly and systematically that security could be dismantled by people I trusted implicitly. As I recounted the key elements of my experience, the manufactured concerns about my cognitive state, the isolation from friends and community, the sedative medication presented as blood pressure pills, the manipulation into signing legal documents. Without understanding their implications, I watched recognition dawn on certain faces in the audience. Not everyone would experience the extreme exploitation I had endured, but many could identify with subtler forms of diminishment or dismissal based on age. The most dangerous element wasn't the specific tactics, I emphasized, but the gradual erosion of my self-trust. When everyone around you confirms a narrative about your declining capabilities, you begin to question your own perceptions. That's what makes elder exploitation particularly insidious. It targets not just financial assets, but the very foundation of personal identity and autonomy. I concluded by highlighting the protective factors that had ultimately helped me escape. The situation, my sister's unwavering belief in my competence, the medical assessment that confirmed my cognitive health, the attorney who took my claims seriously, and eventually, the community that rallied to support my recovery and rebuilding. No single safeguard is sufficient, I noted, but together, they create a network too strong to be easily manipulated. That's why today's gathering matters. We're strengthening the collective commitment to elder dignity that makes exploitation more difficult and less likely to succeed. The Q&A session that followed revealed the diverse concerns weighing on attendees' minds. Adult children worried about balancing respect for parents' independence with legitimate safety concerns. Seniors sought guidance on establishing legal protections without becoming vulnerable to misuse of those same documents. Financial advisors and healthcare providers asked about warning signs they should report and those that might deserve more nuanced responses. Throughout the discussion, I emphasized the core principle that had emerged from my experience and subsequent work. Dignity requires both protection and risk. The answer wasn't eliminating all vulnerability in seniors' lives, but ensuring they retained decision-making authority over which risks they chose to accept and which protections they wished to implement. As the formal program concluded and attendees moved toward the refreshment tables, Tyler approached, giving me the quick side hug that had become his preferred greeting since reaching his current impressive height. "Grandma, that was really good," he said with the straightforward assessment typical of his age. "Especially the part about how people treat you differently once they think you're confused. That's what I noticed first, before I understood what Mom and Dad were doing. How they started talking about you instead of to you, even when you were right there." His observation, so insightful yet matter-of-fact, reminded me again of how perceptive young people could be when adults bothered to listen. Throughout the painful aftermath of Michael and Becky's actions, Tyler had demonstrated remarkable emotional intelligence, processing his parents' betrayal without allowing it to corrupt his own moral compass. "How's your mom doing?" I asked, maintaining my practice of separating my feelings about what Michael and Becky had done from Tyler and Sophia's need to maintain relationships with their parents. "Better, I think. Her job at the mall is going okay. She talks about what happened now, not just making excuses. Her therapist says that's progress." He shrugged. "Dad's different. Still says he was trying to help you, that everything got twisted around. I don't bring it up much when I visit anymore." The information aligned with my limited knowledge of Michael and Becky's post-incarceration adjustments. Becky, released 4 months earlier after serving 18 months, had shown tentative signs of genuine remorse and was rebuilding her life with considerably more humility than she'd previously displayed. Michael, halfway through his 3-year sentence, remained entrenched in self-justification according to his letters, though his communications had at least evolved from blaming me for his circumstances to acknowledging that his actions, whatever their supposed intent, had caused harm. Whether genuine reconciliation might eventually be possible remained uncertain. I had moved beyond the acute pain of betrayal to a more nuanced grief, mourning what was irretrievably lost while remaining cautiously open to whatever form of relationship might prove possible and healthy in the future. This measured stance reflected not lingering anger but the hard-won wisdom of maintaining boundaries while allowing space for authentic change. "Hey, Grandma," Tyler continued, checking his phone. "Sophia's study group finished early. She's waiting at the cafe down the street. Want to grab dinner before I drive back to Chicago? I'd love that. Let me just finish up here." As Tyler moved to help Patricia gather leftover materials, I took a moment to appreciate the unexpected gifts nestled within the larger tragedy. My strengthened relationship with my grandchildren, who split their time between Judith and Robert's home in Chicago, and extended stays with me in Mapleton. The elder rights program that provided purpose beyond what I could have imagined in retirement. The deeper connections with friends like Marcus and Ruth, who had moved from being pleasant neighbors to essential components of my support system. None of these compensated for what had been lost. Nothing could erase the trauma of betrayal or the permanent alterations to family relationships. The healing wasn't about balancing losses against gains in some cosmic ledger, but about creating meaning from experience that might otherwise have remained simply destructive. I gathered my things, said goodbye to Detective Garcia and Patricia, and walked with Tyler toward the cafe where Sophia waited. The April evening was mild, with spring flowers emerging in planters along Main Street and trees beginning to leaf out against the twilight sky. We passed the Blue Kettle Cafe, where Darlene waved through the window, and Riverside Park, where I now led twice-weekly Tai Chi classes for seniors after discovering the practice during my recovery. These familiar landmarks no longer carried the shadow of what had nearly been stolen from me. Instead, they had been reclaimed and reinvested with new meaning, not just as elements of the life I'd managed to retain, but as components of the expanded existence I'd created from the ashes of betrayal. "Grandma," Tyler said suddenly, pausing, on the sidewalk. "I've been thinking about something. For my senior project, I want to make a documentary about elder exploitation, using parts of your story but also interviewing other survivors. Do you think that would be okay?" The question touched me deeply. Not just the consideration of asking permission, but the recognition that my experience could serve as a bridge to understanding broader issues affecting many others. "I think that would be more than okay," I replied. "I think it would be wonderful." As we continued toward the restaurant where Sophia waited, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from victim to survivor to advocate. The path had been marked by pain I wouldn't wish on anyone, yet had led to purpose I wouldn't trade. My life had been irreversibly altered by one betrayal, but that single chapter, however devastating, had neither defined nor concluded my story. Instead, like the perennial flowers now emerging in gardens throughout Mapleton, a form of rebirth had followed what appeared to be destruction. Not a perfect restoration of what existed before, but a new growth with its own strength and beauty, rooted in experience and reaching toward possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.